The dust tasted of alkali and despair. Alara pulled the thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, a futile gesture against the biting wind that whipped across the rutted street of this unforgiving settlement. Her belly, a silent, burgeoning burden beneath the worn fabric, tightened with a familiar ache, mirroring the knot of fear in her gut. She was a Comanche woman, far from her people, adrift in a sea of hostile stares and whispers that clawed at her like invisible thorns. Every glance felt like a judgment, every muttered word a stone thrown. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the cracked earth, praying only for invisibility. The man's voice was a low growl, heavy with cheap whiskey and contempt. "Looky here, boys. A squaw. Got a belly on her too. Probably some half-breed filth." He reached out a dirty hand, snagging her arm. She flinched, trying to pull away, but his grip was iron. Panic surged, cold and sharp. Another man laughed, a cruel, grating sound. The first man raised his other hand, palm open, aimed at her face. Time seemed to stretch, the world narrowing to that impending blow, the shame and pain she had learned to expect. Her child stirred within her, a tiny, vulnerable life she had to protect. Then, a movement at the edge of her vision. A figure detached itself from the shadowed doorway of a saloon. Tall, lean, clad in buckskins that looked trail-worn and faded. His face was rough-hewn, partially obscured by the brim of a low-slung hat, but there was an intensity in his posture that drew the eye. He didn't call out, didn't issue a warning. He simply walked forward, a measured, deliberate pace that cut through the jeering air. The man holding her scoffed, "Mind your own business, stranger." The figure stopped a few feet away. His voice, when it came, was quiet but carried an unnerving weight. "She's with child. So? Don't mean nothin'." The hand holding her arm tightened. The stranger didn't speak again. He moved swiftly, a blur of controlled force. A single, powerful punch landed squarely on the jaw of the man holding her. There was a sickening crunch, and the man stumbled back, releasing her arm, his eyes wide with surprise and pain before he collapsed into the dust. The other men scattered, suddenly less eager for sport. The stranger stood over the fallen man for a moment, then turned his gaze to her. It was the first time she met his eyes, gray, steady, unreadable, yet devoid of the cruelty she was accustomed to. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't ask if she was hurt. He simply looked at her, a long, assessing gaze. Then he spoke, his voice low and final, audible only to her. "You're mine now." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a claim staked not out of desire, but necessity. He had intervened, broken the unspoken rules of this place, and in doing so, he had bound their fates. He turned and walked away, not looking back, assuming she would follow. She hesitated for only a heartbeat. The dust, the stairs, the lingering threat in the air behind her were far more terrifying than the silent, unknown path ahead. Clutched by a grim, desperate hope, she followed. The silence between them stretched like the vast, empty landscape they traveled. He rode ahead, a silent, solitary figure on his horse, never too far for her to lose sight of him, yet never close enough for conversation. She walked, her moccasins padding softly on the earth, her body growing heavier with each passing mile. The raw claim he had made back in the settlement felt less like possession now and more like a strange, wordless tether. He had saved her from one brutality, only to bind her to himself. Yet he offered no cruelty, only distance and a steady, unspoken watchfulness. At night, he made a small fire, always ensuring she was sheltered from the wind. He shared his meager rations, hardtack, dry jerky, occasionally a rabbit he snared with unnerving speed. He never spoke unless absolutely necessary, usually a direction, a warning about the terrain, or a curt offer of food. "Eat, drink, rest," these were his words. Her own tongue felt thick and clumsy. She was used to the rhythms of her people's speech, the nuances of gesture and song. His world was stark, defined by silence and action. She watched him from the periphery of her vision, how his hands moved with practiced ease, setting up a crude shelter, cleaning his rifle. How his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, alert to unseen dangers. She noted the economy of his movements, the absence of wasted effort. He was a man shaped by solitude and the harsh demands of survival. Fear of him slowly began to give way to a cautious curiosity. Why had he intervened? What did he want? The answers remained hidden behind his impassive face and guarded silence. Her internal world, however, was a tumult. Memories of her family, her lost home, mingled with the gnawing uncertainty of her future. Her people valued connection, community, the strength of the circle. This man was an island, yet she was dependent on him. Her condition made her vulnerable, the long journey taxing her strength. She felt the weight of her child, a precious secret she carried alone, and a fierce determination to see this journey through, for the child's sake. She observed him, trying to decipher his nature. He was not kind in the way her people understood kindness, but neither was he cruel. He was responsible. His actions, stark and simple, spoke of a protection he seemed to have taken upon himself, a consequence of his own intervention. One evening, a storm broke with sudden ferocity. Rain lashed down, the wind howled. He moved quickly, pulling her into the scant shelter of an overhang. He built a small fire, shielding it with his body. The flickering flames illuminated his face for a moment, revealing lines etched by weather and hardship, but also a surprising absence of malice. He offered her a blanket, his movement brief and efficient. As she huddled beneath it, watching the rain, she felt a flicker of something other than fear or dependency. It was a fragile sense of safety, purchased with his silence and his strength. The world outside was chaos, but here, beneath the rock, warmed by the small fire, there was a tentative peace. The strange claim felt less like a chain and more like shelter. Days bled into weeks. They found a small, secluded valley, tucked away from the main trails, sheltered by rocky outcrops. It was a place of quiet solitude, where the harshness of the world felt momentarily muted. Here, the slow, painstaking process of building a life began, not with grand declarations, but with the simple necessities of survival. He built a more substantial shelter using fallen logs and sod. She, despite her condition, helped where she could, gathering firewood, preparing the simple meals. The silence between them remained, but it was changing. It was no longer the silence of fear or hostility, but a quiet shared space, filled with the sounds of their tasks, the rustling of leaves, the distant cries of birds. Her internal monologue shifted. She still carried the weight of her past, the grief of loss, but a new resilience was taking root. She watched him work, his movements strong and sure. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture, the direction of his gaze, understanding his moods without words. She saw the care he took in his work, the methodical way he approached each task. He was not a man of many words, but his actions were deliberate and meaningful. He had saved her, provided for her, protected her. The initial shock of his claim had faded, replaced by a growing, grudging respect. One afternoon, while she was gathering roots near the stream, she heard it, the faint, unmistakable sound of horses and voices that were not his. Fear, sharp and immediate, pierced through her newfound calm. Raiders? Trappers? The men from the settlement? She instinctively flattened herself against the earth, her heart pounding against her ribs. The sounds grew closer. She knew she was exposed. Then, she saw him. He wasn't running towards her. He was moving silently, swiftly, using the terrain to his advantage, positioning himself between the sound and their camp, between the sound and her. He drew his rifle, his body low, melting into the landscape. He was the predator, the protector, the barrier against the outside world. She watched, breathless, her trust in him solidifying in that moment of silent defense. The voices passed by, closer than she liked, but they didn't find the hidden valley. When the sounds faded, he remained in position for a long time, listening. Only when he was certain the danger had passed did he slowly lower his rifle and rise. He didn't call out to her. He simply turned his head, his gaze sweeping the area where she was. She emerged from her hiding spot, walking towards him. He met her halfway. For the first time, his expression was not entirely neutral. There was a flicker of relief, perhaps, or a quiet acknowledgement of the shared threat. He didn't speak of the danger. Instead, he looked at her, then at her belly. "Soon," he murmured, the single word holding a surprising weight of recognition, perhaps even anticipation. In that moment, the bond between them deepened, forged not by love or desire, but by shared vulnerability and the stark, undeniable reality of his protection. The world narrowed to their small valley, their shared existence. The seasons turned. The harsh sun gave way to the crisp air of autumn. The child within Alara grew restless, signaling its imminent arrival. Fear returned, sharp and primal, but it was no longer the fear of hostile strangers or the unknown man who had claimed her. It was the ancient, universal fear of childbirth, amplified by her isolation. But she was not entirely alone. When the pains began, ragged and intense, she cried out, not in words, but in the raw, elemental sounds of her ancestors. He was there instantly, not with panic, but with the quiet, steady presence that had become her anchor. He didn't know the rituals or practices of her people, but he brought water, heated stones, provided whatever scant comfort he could. He sat near, his gaze unwavering, a silent vigil against the darkness and the pain. For hours he remained, his stoic facade cracking just enough to reveal the depth of his unspoken commitment. He wasn't just a protector anymore. He was a witness, a partner in this most vulnerable moment. When the baby cried, a thin, reedy sound that nonetheless filled the world, it was not just her child, but their child, born into this strange, necessary union. He looked at the tiny, wrinkled face, his expression unreadable, yet she sensed a profound shift within him, a yielding of his solitude. He had intervened to prevent cruelty, claimed her in a brutal world, and in doing so had inadvertently created a life, a family. In the quiet days that followed, as she nursed the baby and slowly regained her strength, the silence between them was no longer empty, but filled with the soft sounds of the infant, the rhythm of their new life. He continued to hunt, to tend to their shelter, his movements perhaps a little softer now, his watchfulness encompassing the small, fragile life he had helped bring into the world. She looked at him, this man without a name she knew, who had fought for her, claimed her, and through his actions, earned a place she never expected him to fill. She was no longer the desperate, terrified woman adrift in a hostile world. Hardship had not broken her. It had tempered her, revealing a strength she didn't know she possessed. She had found resilience in the face of loss and dignity in the most undignified circumstances. The man who had made her his had not enslaved her, but by providing shelter and protection, had allowed her to reclaim herself. Their connection was not born of love, but of shared survival, mutual respect, and the quiet miracle of a new life. They were two outsiders, forging a home in the wilderness, bound together by a single act of defiance against cruelty. And in the warmth of their fire, in the soft cooing of their child, there was a fragile, resilient hope for the future.